In our discussion today, we're going to take a look at the resurgence of populist movements throughout the world, compare and contrast it with the rise of authoritarian regimes in the first half of the 20th century, and consider how the failures of political elites, aka the Davos Man, have contributed to this movement. Let's think about these few questions we can raise in this area. For example, are there really unsettling parallels between those horrific totalitarians of nearly 100 years ago and modern-day populist movements when viewed through the lens of Hannah Arendt's book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, which provided a framework for understanding the potential dangers of populism? How does the resurgence of Donald Trump and the worldwide rise of other populist political leaders relate to the failures of establishment elites? What are the positives and negatives of the modern-day populist movements, and how can we seek out the best outcomes? Let's begin by getting into Arendt's points that tie populism with the potential for totalitarian governments. First, totalitarian regimes thrive on the creation of mass movements, mobilizing large segments of the population through appeals to emotion and resentment, simplifying complex issues, creating enemies, and fostering an atmosphere of fear and suspicion. Similarly, populist leaders often galvanize support by exploiting real feelings of disenfranchisement and anger, channeling them towards a designated enemy. Some think that modern tactics, such as utilizing social media to spread a message, be it true or false, is an example of this. Some believe that such tactics should be vigorously suppressed by big tech and media companies. However, others, myself included, believe that the suppression of open online dialogue through labeling, shadow banning, and even blocking the other side's ideas as misinformation or propaganda only fuels the fires of discontent. Next, totalitarian regimes often center around a charismatic leader who is presented as the embodiment of the nation's will. This cult of personality allows the leader to operate above the law and beyond reproach. Populist leaders often cultivate a similar image, portraying themselves as powerful figures who alone can solve the nation's problems. The problem we have as citizens is how to discern between the good ideas a charismatic leader has and those that create the authoritarian atmosphere. Is having the trains run on time really worth the loss of freedom? Another aspect of totalitarian regimes that Arendt observed is that they thrive on isolating individuals from each other, destroying traditional social bonds and creating a society of atomized individuals susceptible to manipulation and control. One example of this was Mao's Cultural Revolution in China, where friends and families were torn apart in struggle sessions. The Netflix show Three Body Problem has a dramatic depiction of this. Critics of populist movements point out that these movements often exploit existing social divisions and anxieties, pitting groups against each other and fostering a sense of alienation and distrust. This isolation makes individuals more vulnerable to the appeals of charismatic leaders who promise to restore order and protect them from real or perceived threats. However, others think that real concerns may get dismissed automatically just because a populist leader references them, resulting in real problems becoming worse. As part of this strategy of isolating the individual, totalitarian regimes systematically undermine the notion of objective truth, replacing it with a constantly shifting narrative that serves the interests of the regime. This creates a climate of confusion and uncertainty, making it difficult for individuals to resist the regime's propaganda. One of my favorite fictional examples of this comes from Orwell's 1984, where a decreased chocolate ration was reimagined as an increase in the ration. Some think that populist movements often engage in similar tactics, dismissing inconvenient facts as fake news and promoting alternative realities that confirm their supporters' biases. Of course, the opposition, using the same suppression tactics to shut down debate, only exacerbates the problem. This erosion of truth makes it difficult to have meaningful political discourse and hold leaders accountable. To help them gain and maintain power, Arendt pointed out that totalitarian regimes often rely on mass movements to mobilize support and suppress dissent. These movements create a sense of belonging and purpose for individuals who feel alienated and disenfranchised, offering them a chance to participate in something larger than themselves. It is often mentioned that populist movements utilize mass rallies and social media campaigns to create a sense of momentum and enthusiasm. Some believe that this mobilization of the masses can be used to intimidate opponents and create the illusion of overwhelming popular support. Others contend that this simply reflects the will of a substantial portion of the population, and dismissing it out of hand will lead to worsening of the situation. Arendt believed that a vibrant public sphere where individuals can freely express their opinions and engage in political debate is essential for a healthy democracy where totalitarian regimes actively suppress this public space, replacing it with staged rallies and controlled propaganda. One modern-day concern is that the decline of civic engagement, the erosion of trust in traditional media, and the rise of online echo chambers pose a threat to the health of public discourse. That's why it is crucial to foster spaces where diverse perspectives can be heard and civilly debated, ensuring that citizens remain active participants in the democratic process. Online spaces where one point of view is suppressed, creating an echo chamber, does not serve the public interest. Next, we should circle back, as the saying goes, to the question of how the various examples of elite establishment failures have led to the election of populist figures, especially Trump in the U.S. A consistent theme we have seen in these elections is the perceived failure of elites across various sectors, including government institutions, academia, media, and public health. These failures have bred resentment and frustration, leading to the rise of populist movements and candidates. From the U.S. perspective, Trump took advantage of foreign and domestic policy failures of what he calls the deep state to boost his campaign. Foreign policy experts seem to have completely misread Chinese, Iranian, and Russian intentions, or been intentionally misleading about them. These failures have left the impression of expert-driven incompetence, resulting in the perception, dare I say the reality, that the world is a more dangerous place today. On the domestic front, we've seen mishandling, perhaps even some deception, from public health officials. We've also seen how badly the opioid epidemic, driven by porous borders, has been handled, resulting in substantial loss of life. We've seen academic institutions become more concerned about checking identity boxes than providing a worthwhile education to students. Inflation, along with wage stagnation and employment instability, has led to widespread disillusionment with the status quo. Meanwhile, we see the elites jetting off to conferences to discuss hypothetical issues in abstract terms that don't address the day-to-day concerns of ordinary people. Basically, this has led to a perfect storm of public mistrust and resentment, while elites essentially fiddle around with trivia or far-off problems. This kind of simmering resentment toward what some call the Davos Man creates an easy opening for populist politicians. Some might call the term of Davos Man a pejorative, a populist way of creating an enemy, but is there some truth behind the label? We can see this world of secretive global conferences, seemingly hypocritical public pronouncements, and so forth, by the elite of the elite. In a sense, it seems to us like they're focused on the wrong things, like their priorities are just completely out of whack with what people are actually experiencing. They see the Davos men operating within this bubble of privilege and detachment, removed from everyday realities, completely out of touch with what is actually happening on the ground. People see clips of the public side of the meetings where they spent all this time talking about abstractions, basically playing buzzword bingo, and sometimes who can make the wildest suggestions, like average people should eat bugs. But at the end of the day, nothing concrete happened. It was just talk, and it seems like they're patting themselves on the back for having good intentions, while the world is literally falling apart. We can see that this can create a self-perpetuating cycle of elitism, where people in these lofty roles get so caught up in their own little world that they completely lose sight of what's actually happening to the rest of us. And that makes them the perfect target for populist leaders who can come in and say, see, these elites don't care about you, and I'm the only one who understands your struggles. It's a potent message, especially when people are already feeling disillusioned and abandoned. After all, populism thrives on that sense of division, offering simple solutions to complex problems and often blaming those in power for problems. We can see that there is widespread frustration, a sense that the elites have failed, and charismatic populist leaders stand ready to exploit those feelings. But where does this all lead? What are the long-term implications? One important thing we need to understand is that populism isn't really about ideology. It's not inherently left-wing or right-wing. It's more of a tactic, a technique for gaining and holding on to power that can be adapted to fit any agenda. It's about tapping into that primal human instinct of belonging, that need to be part of a group. Populist leaders are masters of exploiting that by creating this sense of unity among their followers and offering a clear vision of the world in times of uncertainty and discord. But how can that politically astute strategy be dangerous? First, populism thrives on polarization, actively trying to divide people, pitting them against each other. It's not just about disagreement, it's about making the other side the enemy. Meaning compromise becomes impossible because you can't compromise with evil. Even more concerning is that if one doesn't adhere to all of the positions of the leader, they're branded as an outsider, the evil enemy. This can lead to an erosion of democratic and societal norms, especially in situations where missteps and malfeasance by establishment institutions make criticisms of them valid to some degree. So in some ways, one could argue that populism can become a positive force. These movements serve to challenge the status quo, disrupting complacent establishment elites and forcing them to address the concerns of ordinary people. Also, as we have seen in recent elections, populist parties often mobilize previously disengaged citizens and bring them into the political process. Perhaps the most important effect is in holding establishment institutions accountable by challenging their power, maybe nudging them towards greater transparency and accountability. To accomplish positive outcomes, it is important that a populist movement address the real problems effectively, not make empty promises or just give a temporary sense of empowerment. Most importantly, rising populism is a symptom of deeper problems that need to be addressed, not swept under a rug of censorship and legal shenanigans. As with any reform initiative, the first thing we need to do is to get rid of this idea that there's some quick fix. The problems we're facing are complicated and deeply entrenched, and it's going to take time and effort, and dare I say compromise, to find real solutions. One crucial step I think is worth considering is to explore ways to improve economic security while avoiding making it an intrusive exercise or a bureaucratic mess. I'd primarily see this in areas like education and job training as well as healthcare, with the goal to give everyone the best chance at achieving what philosophers call the good life. I see this as crucial because when people feel like the system is rigged against them, they're more likely to turn to extreme, even violent solutions. This scenario can easily lead to oppression, either from a populist dictatorship or from the established institutions cracking down on opposition groups. We also need to find ways to rebuild social trust, finding ways to foster dialogue, encourage empathy, and bridge divides. Basically, it's all about recognizing our shared humanity, understanding that we're all in this together. Yeah, I know that sounds lovely in theory, but in practice, well, it's tough. It feels like we're becoming more divided with everyone retreating into their echo chambers. It's hard to have a civil conversation, especially with someone who vehemently disagrees with you. To work through this, we have to be willing to listen to each other, even if we don't agree. Can we find common ground, build bridges, have those tough conversations, even when it's uncomfortable? Can we work together to find workable compromises instead of focusing on divisions and differences that politicians of all stripes can use to exploit us? Maybe. I hope that we can find ways to work out these deep divisions and preserve a legacy of freedom and not give way to darker impulses of violence, tyranny, and oppression. Well, thanks for listening to my ramblings on this tricky topic. What do you think of populism and its negative and positive effects? Let me know what you think in the comments. I appreciate hearing your thoughts on the subjects discussed here, and do the like and subscribe thing to appease the AI overlords. Thanks again for your support.